I've played World of Warcraft for over 20 years. Of those 20 years, I've spent 16 role-playing as the Lich King, and probably the rest of the time role-playing in Goldshire and Elwyn Forest. I've played PvE, PvP, done almost everything in the game up to a casuals max best percent. But this year I decided I would try Guild Wars 2, taking a look at the game that honestly has existed almost as long as World of Warcraft. In fact, it's been around pretty much just under the same time period, if you include Guild Wars 1. And I wanted to really get a look into the differences between the games and give you my thoughts and opinions on what makes them so different. So the first thing you'll notice when you start Guild Wars, if you're not lagging like I am in these clips, is that the combat is different. It's probably the thing that immediately sticks out to everyone. It's a tab targeting game, but with action style combat. You have tab targeting, but you also have the ability to dodge, to roll. Your abilities have certain skill shots depending on what they are, ranges, and essentially, for lack of a better term, it's a pseudo tab targeting action MMO. It's not nearly the same level of action as your Black Desert Onlines or your Terra style games, but it definitely has a lot more mobility and at first can seem pretty shallow. You might think, oh, my class only has 4 skills or 8 skills depending on what you pick and what you roll with. But once you start learning about the effects of combat, the layers of combat, especially as you kind of near the end of your 20 hours, and depending on your class, you'll learn that there's a lot of depth to the Guild Wars 2 combat that at surface level may not seem so apparent. Combo fielding, combining abilities, all the stuff you begin to learn near the end of these 20 hours. Obviously, as you level up and gain skills. The second thing that you'll notice a lot in Guild Wars is the progression. Progression is all over the place. When you start the game, you are given essentially a couple guidelines. The top right hand of your screen will show you what story quest to proceed on once you hit certain levels. But other than that, you're pretty much free to explore. Whether you're going to go gathering, crafting, doing world events, most of your time will be spent completing hearts, which are the game's versions of quests, but are locked to zones and regions, and you perform different activities for them. Sometimes feeding animals, sometimes cleaning up, most times defeating enemies is always an option, but there are a variety of activities and ways to solve the problems. There's also skill trees and talent points that you can pick up to help upgrade your character, and these generally require you to fight bosses or certain enemies or complete certain challenges. This lack of clear-cut progression is something I'll talk about a little bit later on, but the way you start the game is quite jarring comparative to World of Warcraft. One of the biggest differences as well is mounts. In World of Warcraft, mounts prior to dragon riding had a very floaty feel, and even now, barring a couple exceptions, most mounts still feel incredibly arcadey. The mounts you get in your first 20 hours of Guild Wars are completely different, with different speeds, weights, turning radiuses, and even different abilities. It can trivialize some of the challenges of the beginning worlds because mounts were added in a lot later, so some of your jumping puzzles and challenges that players have are essentially kind of run aground, but the mounts do feel completely different. They're almost like a different vehicle of mobility rather than just a movement speed increase. Gathering and crafting are also a slap in the face compared to how you experience in World of Warcraft. Farming nodes can feel the same, but there are different grades that you need to have in terms of equipment carried on you to farm these nodes. These will have to be upgraded as you progress throughout the areas. And when you're crafting, I mean just looking at the crafting screen should give you enough of goosebumps or feelings of anxiety compared to what you experience in World of Warcraft. The layers are intricate. There's discovering new items and recipes, those that you either have to look up online. Guild Wars crafting is one of those kind of games where back in the day you would have paid, $4 or $5 for what they call the cheat manual, where they give you all the recipes in a single book, and Guild Wars kind of follows that trend. It doesn't really hold your hand or introduce you to the best ways to do things, and most times you're going to need to Google some kind of YouTuber to make progress. And I think that best surmises the difference between Guild Wars and World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft, with all its new kind of mechanisms that's introduced, its new tutorial experiences, the way it starts the game, and just the ease at which the game begins, honestly speaking, is pretty straightforward a game. It's very arcadey and has a floaty feel, but it has an ease of entry that Guild Wars doesn't really have. If you start World of Warcraft today, you will be told to start an expansion, to level through an expansion, guided into what expansion if you are a new player. You will have the option to select a starting zone, and the game itself will give you different tooltips and mechanisms to kind of make your way. You have certain objectives and quests that are highlighted on your map now to showcase what are important and pivotal, and your experience in World of Warcraft is a very standard, vanilla, entry-level game. You're given quests, you follow the quest givers, you finish those quests, you move on to the next one. You can LFG into dungeons, etc. Guild Wars is nothing like that. Guild Wars can very much seem to you like the core concept of the game for the first 20 hours is simply running around. In fact, you can get all the way up to level 70 or 70 plus in those 20 hours, simply running around, doing a whole bunch of stuff, and not even knowing why you're doing it. You could craft without knowing how. You could gather materials and sell them without any idea what you need them for. Completing hearts and objectives is simply running from point to point, and this can sometimes feel a little bit jarring for players. I know for me, as someone who isn't into sandbox MMOs, and the only true sandbox experience I ever truly enjoyed was Minecraft, Guild Wars was definitely jarring at first. And for me, if I didn't have friends or people to help me through it, I do probably think it'd be one of those games that I might have been turned away from. But I think if you stick with Guild Wars, and if you get through those first 20 hours, you can have an incredibly good experience. I think you can have an experience with the game that is on a different level of depth and different level of experience to what World of Warcraft is. See, World of Warcraft and other MMOs, you go through a vertical path. The first 20 hours of Guild Wars is a vertical path, a very disjointed, disarrayed, and slightly squiggly vertical path. But it's a vertical path that leads to a very expansive, open, horizontal endgame. And I know this because I actually played Guild Wars for 500 hours. Yes, it was over 12 years ago, but I actually did experience the endgame in Guild Wars. It's the kind of game that when you dig that little bit deeper, when you get that little bit further, I think Guild Wars starts to really reward you. It's one of those games where it really opens up at level 80, and I know that's said about a lot of MMOs, but take it from me in that the horizontal expansion of the game with Guild Wars is very dramatic at level 80. You get fractals, which are great PvE, you get raids, you get more traditional PvE content. PvP really opens up with world versus world, arenas, rated arenas, and you can start to really fine-tune and goals orientate yourself towards certain gear and progression. And Guild Wars, more than anything else, has rafts of content that you can fall into no matter what point you start the game at. So it's really one of those situations where I think the first 20 hours are the hardest, but the next 200 will be some of the best. But yeah, that's it from me.